Hello, everyone. Today we are going to talk about behavioral interviewing. So today's topics, we're going to go over the importance of behavioral interviewing. We're going to talk about the most common questions in behavioral interviewing. We're then going to go over some methods for answering behavioral interview questions, and we're actually going to compare a number of them. We're going to go over some stories and some ideas for stories, and then we're going to end off with some tips. So what's the importance of behavioral interviewing? Well, once qualifications are established, the employer then starts to look at things like soft skills and how well does the potential candidate fit within the company. Employers use behavioral interviewing to assess soft skills in more concrete terms. The assumption that goes along with this is that a behavior displayed in the past is an adequate predictor of how you will behave in the future. This is important because you want to use stories that will illustrate how you would address a problem now and in the future. So now that we've established why behavioral interviewing is so prevalent in our interviewing landscape, let's talk a little bit about some of the most common behavioral questions that you will see out there. I have a list on the side from 1 to 9. You will note that almost all of these are soft skills. 1 or 2 of them are hard skills, but they are mainly soft skills. You can always spot a behavioral interview question because it always starts with, tell me about a time when you, and then insert the behavioral interview question. So I'll give you an example. Tell me about a time when you had a conflict with a team member. Tell me about a time when you solved a problem, dealt with an upset customer, had to sell an idea, experienced a sudden change at work, were forced to prioritize, saw someone stealing or cheating. Tell me about a time when you failed and what did you learn? And finally, tell me about a time you were in a stressful situation and how did you handle it? So these are the 9 most common types of behavioral interview questions. There are going to be others that are going to assess particular types of skills. So this is going to vary depending on the job that you are applying for. But these are the most common ones in today's landscape. So how do we go about answering these questions? Well, there's a number of different methods. So many people have heard of the STAR method. Some people have heard of the SOAR method. Some people have heard of the PAR method, the CAR method, and the CARL method. So which exactly is the best method? Well, let's take a look at each of these. So the STAR method stands for situation, task, action, result. SOAR stands for situation, obstacle, action, result. CARL is context, action, result, learnings. PAR is problem, action, result. And CAR is context, action, result. So they're very similar in their format, but there is one unique difference with just one of them. So if you look at what each of these stories have in common, all of them set the stage for the story in one way, shape, or form. Across the board, they all talk about what you did, what was your action, and across the board, all of them have a result attached to them. So basically what happened. But only CARL goes a little bit deeper and actually talks about what you took away from the experience. What I like about the CARL method is that you are actually doubling the amount of time that you are talking about results rather than talking about the context or necessarily the action. So immediately this comes off as being more results oriented. And yes, learning is a result, but it's not learning as it's confined to the individual event. It's what you took out of it and can apply elsewhere. If you go back to the assumptions on why we use behavioral interviewing questioning, you will find that it says that an action you took in the past is an adequate predictor of your actions in the future. So if you include learnings into this, you're actually showing that the story that you're using is not stagnant. You're also showing a progression of growth, and you are communicating to the employer that learning is just as important to you as getting the job done. So let's talk about the individual steps of the Carl method. So context. So when you are putting down a story, you want to start with, what do people need to know to follow the story? Specific details such as the setting or problem, objective, very similar to how the other questions framed it, except simply context. Action, what was your part? Not your team's part, not what other people did, what you specifically contributed. Results, what happened as a direct result of your actions? And finally, learnings. So what did you learn and what would you do differently next time? So let's try 2 examples: ability to adapt and problem solve. Tell me about a time when you were forced to adapt. Well, when the pandemic lockdown first occurred, I was working for a DEF company. There was a lot we suddenly needed to figure out. We were forced to move all of our operations to a completely digital format. I took the opportunity to brush up on some of my technical skills, including use of case conferencing software, PowerPoint, cloud drive systems, and digital signature solutions. I then proceeded to teach other employees these skills, and I suggested developing a few new processes. The result was the team was able to make the transition faster, and we only had downtime for about a week before we were up and running again, well ahead of most of our industry counterparts. Upon reflection, though, I concluded that sometimes major changes, even unwanted changes, can have positive impacts and allow us to develop brand new skill sets. Tell me about a time when you solved a problem at one of your last companies. While working as an administrator for HIJ Company Limited, I worked on sourcing contractors for projects. We would put out a call to different contractors on a list, but we weren't tracking their performance on jobs. This would sometimes cost us money in rework and, well, quality issues. So I created a follow-up process which measured the speed in which they completed their jobs, whether rework was needed, and overall customer satisfaction. I then sorted our list by A contractors, B contractors, C contractors, and unknown contractors if we hadn't worked with them before. Because of this new tracking system, we were able to make better decisions and strategically select better contractors for jobs. What I took away from this experience is that having good measurements is important for good quality assurance, better decision-making, higher customer satisfaction, and overall project profitability. All right, let's jump into stories. There's a number of ways that you can go about getting ideas of which stories you should probably have ready. And here are just a few ideas. So review the job postings for both hard and soft skills. I go in a little bit on how you should combine soft skills and hard skills in my T-bar method video. You can find the link in the video description. But I would intentionally combine both hard skills and soft skills in your stories. You can also review the 9 common types of behavioral questions as I illustrated earlier. You can also generate a list of the top 5 skills specifically for your profession. And finally, I would plan for a minimum of 5 stories. You ideally should have more, but you want to have at least a core 5 for 5 interview questions that you think you will be asked. And here are my top tips for the end of this video. So you want to use a consistent format. You don't necessarily want to mix Carl and star because you don't want to confuse yourself during the interview. So if you're comfortable with star, stick with star. If you want to try out Carl, try Carl, but just be aware of how you're using them. You don't want to confuse yourself halfway through an interview. Another idea is that you can practice your answers with Zoom, record them on Zoom, and then you can get faster feedback. So record on Zoom, and then you can play back and see how you reacted and answered interview questions. Number 3, never answer a negative question with "I've never experienced that" or "much of that." And I want to give some context to this because as a recruiter, this really irritated me. So I'll give you an example. Tell me about a time when you've experienced conflict with a team member. And the response would be, "Well, I've never experienced much conflict." And then they jump into a picture-perfect answer of how they should deal with conflict in the workplace. But they basically said they've never actually put these skills into practice, yet they seem to have the skills all ready to go. Corporate recruiters and hiring managers will probably pick on this one a little bit more because it just doesn't ring true. Another one that I would get is, "Tell me about a time when you've been late." "Oh, I've never been late." You've never had an assignment that was late. You've never been delayed by anybody. You've never had a bad day where something caused you to be late. You know, everyone's experienced lateness at one point. So it's important to not answer these questions in a way that actually makes you seem like you're being dishonest. And finally, I mentioned earlier about combining hard skills and soft skills in your story. You might also consider looking at the job posting to see exactly what hard skills that they're asking for, and think about times when you've used that and try to weave it into your stories. And that's it for behavioral interviewing. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to subscribe for more content. Again, my name is Jesse. I'm an employment specialist at Epilepsy Toronto. Catch you next time.